She laughed, right there in the courtroom, loud enough for the judge to look up. Daniel Carter didn't flinch. He just set the pen down on the divorce papers, picked up his worn mechanic's cap from the table, and walked out without a single word. Everyone in that room thought they were watching a broken man leave with nothing. They were wrong. What nobody knew, not his wife, not her lawyers, not one single person in that building, was that Daniel Carter had just quietly signed away the best performance of his life. And the truth, hiding behind that silence, it was about to change everything. Drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you believe a quiet man can carry the loudest secret, hit subscribe. You're going to want to be here for this one. The morning Daniel Carter walked into Hargrove County Family Court, he drove himself there in a 2009 Ford F-150 with a cracked side mirror and a check engine light that had been on since March. He wore the same flannel shirt he'd worn to his brother's funeral 2 years back, dark blue, pressed clean, with a small grease stain near the second button that wouldn't wash out no matter how many times he tried. His boots were steel-toed Wolverines, scuffed at the toe, resoled once already. He'd bought them 11 years ago at a work supply store outside of Knoxville. He carried no briefcase, no folder, no phone out and scrolling. He walked to the third floor, found the right courtroom, and sat in the hallway on a wooden bench with his hands folded between his knees, waiting. That was Daniel Carter on the morning his marriage ended, a man who looked like he'd just come from under a car and was planning to go back to one. And in a way, that's exactly what people thought of him. Her name was Victoria Harlow Carter, though by that morning she'd already started using just Harlow again on her email signature. She arrived 20 minutes late, not because she was disorganized, but because she wanted to. Her attorney, a man named Philip Breck, who charged $620 an hour and wore cufflinks to everything, walked half a step behind her with a leather portfolio tucked under his arm. And Victoria was 34, sharp-jawed, and dressed in a charcoal blazer with a cream blouse underneath. She had the kind of posture that said, "I own the room before I enter it." Regional Vice President of Operations at Caldwell Meridian Group. Youngest woman to hold the title in the company's history. She had given 2 TED-style talks at corporate conferences and had been featured in a regional business magazine under the headline, "The Unstoppable Rise of Victoria Harlow." She saw Daniel on the bench and slowed for just half a second. Then she turned to Philip and said loud enough to carry, "Is he really wearing that?" Philip glanced once and kept walking. "Doesn't matter what he's wearing." "It matters to me," she said. Inside the courtroom, they sat on opposite sides of a long wooden table. Judge Eleanor Tate presided, a woman in her late 60s with reading glasses on a beaded chain, and the quiet authority of someone who had seen every flavor of marital collapse. A court reporter sat to her left. Both attorneys bookended their clients. Judge Tate reviewed the initial documents, cleared her throat once. "Mr. Carter," she said, looking up, "you've declined legal representation for today's proceeding. Is that still your position?" "Yes, ma'am," Daniel said. Philip Breck made a small sound, not quite a laugh, not quite a cough. Something in between. Victoria leaned slightly toward him and whispered something. He covered his mouth and looked down at his portfolio. Daniel watched it happen. He didn't look away, didn't tighten his jaw. He just watched the way a man watches weather pass through. "You understand," Judge Tate continued, "that without counsel, you are responsible for understanding and agreeing to any and all terms presented today." "I do," Daniel said. "I've read everything." "All 43 pages." "All 43 pages." The judge studied him for a moment. "All right then, let's proceed." The terms were not complicated, not in the way people might expect. The marriage had lasted 6 years. The house had been purchased jointly and carried a mortgage. Victoria's legal team had done a thorough accounting of shared assets, the joint savings account, 2 vehicles, some furniture, a timeshare in Hilton Head that nobody had used in 3 years. Their son Eli was 5 years old. He had his father's quiet eyes and his mother's stubborn chin. The custody proposal on the table gave Victoria primary residential custody, with Daniel receiving every other weekend and 1 weeknight per month. Daniel had read that page 6 times at the kitchen table the night before with Eli asleep upstairs, and had felt something move through his chest that had no clean name. Not grief exactly, not anger. Something older and colder. But he hadn't called the lawyer. He had made a decision. And that decision was sitting there now, folded up and held tight inside a man who had learned a long time ago that the most dangerous thing you can do is let people know what you're capable of before you need them to know. Mr. Carter, Philip Breck said, sliding a document across the table. You'll see that the proposed settlement reflects the standard 50-50 split on all joint marital assets. This includes the shared savings, which stands at $41,217, Daniel said, and 80 cents. Philip paused. Correct. I know what the accounts say, Daniel said. I'm not contesting the split. Victoria looked up from her own copy of the papers. Something shifted in her expression. Not suspicion exactly. More like the mild confusion of someone who expected a longer fight and wasn't getting one. You're not contesting any of it, she said. Daniel looked at her. No. The house either? No. She leaned back. Daniel. Vic, he said quietly. I didn't come here to fight over the house. Then what did you come here for? Me. He reached into the front pocket of his flannel and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He unfolded it carefully. It was handwritten in his block print and slid it across to Judge Tate. I came for that, he said. Judge Tate unfolded the paper and read it without expression. After a moment, she set it down and looked at Daniel. You're requesting primary residential custody of the minor child Elias Carter. Yes, ma'am. Philip Breck straightened. Victoria's chin dropped forward. That's not... she started. That's your prerogative to request, the judge said, glancing at Victoria. And it is something this court will examine fully. She looked back at Daniel. Do you understand this will require a formal custody evaluation? Interviews home, visits a guardian ad litem assigned to your son. Yes, ma'am. I've already made arrangements for the evaluation. Philip turned to Victoria and said something low. She was staring at Daniel. You can't be serious, she said. Daniel folded his hands on the table. Eli wakes up at 6:15 every morning. He likes his eggs scrambled, not too wet. He's afraid of thunderstorms, and he won't tell you that he'll just get quiet. He sleeps with a stuffed elephant named Captain because I told him elephants are the strongest animals on land. He stopped. I know my son Victoria. The room was quiet. Victoria's jaw moved once like she was going to say something, and then didn't. We'll schedule the evaluation, Judge Tate said. In the meantime, interim custody arrangements will reflect. I'll agree to the interim schedule she proposed, Daniel said. Every other weekend. The 1 weeknight. I'll take that while we wait. The judge looked at him with the careful attention of someone recalculating something. That's very generous of you, Mr. Carter. It's not generous, he said. It's temporary. And Eli needs to feel stable right now. Me dragging this out doesn't help him feel stable. After the hearing wrapped its preliminary stage, they moved into a small corridor outside the courtroom. The attorneys were exchanging documents. Judge Tate had retired to her chambers. Victoria came to stand beside Daniel at the window. She crossed her arms and looked out at the parking lot below. You don't have a lawyer, she said. No. Why not? Didn't need one for this part. She turned to look at him. For this part, she repeated. What does that mean? He picked up his cap from where he'd set it on the windowsill. Nothing yet, Daniel. There was an edge in her voice now, not quite anger, something more like the sound of someone realizing the map they've been using might not be right. You work at a mechanic shop. You make what, $45,000 a year? 50. You live in a house you can't afford to buy out. You drive a truck that should have been retired 2 years ago. She paused. You can't win a custody fight. Not against me. Not with my resources. He put his cap on, adjusted the brim. I appreciate your honesty, he said. Daniel, Eli's at my mom's right now. I told him I'd be back by noon. He looked at his watch, a beat-up Timex with a rubber strap. I should go. He walked away down the corridor without looking back. She watched him go. And in that moment, Victoria Harlow Carter did the one thing that would cost her everything. She laughed. Not cruelly exactly. Not in a way she would have admitted to later. But it was a laugh, a small exhale of amused contempt that her attorney caught and looked away from, and that two paralegals in the hallway definitely heard the sound of a woman who believed she understood exactly what she was dealing with. She had no idea. Daniel Carter was born in Dunmore, a town in eastern Tennessee that barely makes it onto maps. His father, Robert Carter, had been a quiet man too, a man of few words and careful hands who ran a small general aviation company called Carter Air Services that handled cargo runs, charter flights, and aircraft maintenance contracts across a 3-state region. Robert had inherited the company from his father, expanded it methodically over 30 years, and never once talked about money in a way that made it the centerpiece of a conversation. Money's a tool, Robert used to say. You don't walk around talking about your hammer. When Robert Carter died of a cardiac event at 64, he left behind a will that had been constructed with the precision of a man who understood that wealth unprotected attracts the wrong kind of attention. His estate attorney, a woman named Harriet Folsom, who had been with the Carter family for over 2 decades, had spent the better part of Robert's final years helping him build a structure designed to outlast him. Trusts nested inside trusts, holdings divided across LLCs, aircraft assets appraised and documented, a portfolio of regional investments in logistics, fuel distribution, and small commercial properties that had been quietly compounding for over 15 years. Daniel inherited everything, not all at once, not in a way that announced itself. The transfer of assets had been structured, deliberately designed so that any casual look at Daniel Carter's life would see exactly what it appeared to be: a mechanic living modestly in a mid-sized house in a quiet town, raising his son, paying his bills, going to work. That was the design. That was his design, not just his father's. Because Daniel had sat across from Harriet Folsom 6 months after the funeral and told her plainly, I want to keep living the way I live. I don't want it to change what I am. And Harriet, who had seen what money did to families when it wasn't handled carefully, had looked at him for a long moment and said, Robert always said you were the one who understood. Understood what? Daniel asked. That what you have and who you are should never be the same sentence. He hadn't told Victoria. This is the part people always get stuck on when they hear the story later. How could you not tell your own wife? And the answer is both simple and complicated in the way that most true things are. In the beginning, when he and Victoria had first started dating, she had been different. Or maybe he had seen what he wanted to see. He'd never been entirely sure which. She was driven. Yes. Ambitious, certainly. But there'd been something real between them once. Something that lived in weekend mornings and small conversations. And the way she'd looked at him in the delivery room when Eli was born, a moment of pure, terrified love that erased everything around it. No, he hadn't told her because by the time he understood who she was, really becoming, it felt too late. And then quietly, it became his protection. Not protection for himself, for Eli. Because Daniel Carter had sat in enough court waiting rooms, had listened to enough conversations through thin walls at Harriet's office, had watched enough men with visible fortunes get dismantled in divorce proceedings, had watched children used as leverage in financial wars. They never asked to be part of, to understand something that most people only learn too late. When money enters the courtroom, children become bargaining chips. He wouldn't let that happen to his son. So he'd kept it quiet, had kept the trusts sealed, had kept the businesses running through a management structure that Harriet oversaw, had kept his name off the surface of everything except what was required by law. And he'd gone to work every day at Randy's Auto and Repair on Teller Road and fixed engines and changed oil and talked about football with the guys and brought Eli lunch on early release days at school. It wasn't an act. That was the part nobody understood. It wasn't performance. It wasn't hiding who he was. It was exactly who he was. The money was a fact, like his height or his blood type. It didn't define his character, and he refused to let it define his life. That evening, after the hearing, Daniel picked Eli up from his mother's house. Eli was 5 and had his father's same quiet watchfulness, the kind of kid who noticed things without announcing them. He walked out to the truck, holding a drawing he'd made at the kitchen table. "What's that?" Daniel asked, buckling him into his booster seat. "A elephant," Eli said. "For Captain, so he's not lonely." Daniel looked at the drawing, a lumpy gray shape with stick legs and a long winding trunk. He folded it carefully and put it in his chest pocket. "That's a real good elephant," he said. "Is today done?" Eli asked. "Yeah, buddy, today's done." "Are you sad?" Daniel started the truck. The engine turned over reliably. He'd tuned it up himself 2 weekends ago. "Not right now," he said honestly. "Right now, I'm just glad to have you back in the truck." Eli considered this with the seriousness of a 5-year-old processing adult information. "Okay," he said. And then, "Can we have grilled cheese?" "Already planned on it." Back at the house, while the sandwiches were on the griddle and Eli was drawing at the kitchen table and Captain the stuffed elephant was propped in his usual spot against the table leg, Daniel's phone buzzed. A text from a number he didn't recognize. "We know who you are, Carter. And we know what your family has. Smart men don't let things get messy in open courtrooms. Think about that before the next hearing." He read it once, set the phone face down on the counter, flipped the sandwiches. "Dad?" Eli said, "What color is an elephant's inside?" "Same as everybody else's," Daniel said. "Red." Eli squinted. "That doesn't seem right." "Nope," Daniel agreed, putting the plates together. "But it's true." He picked the phone back up, took a screenshot of the message, sent it to Harriet Folsom with 2 words. "It's starting." Her response came back in under 4 minutes. "And good. We're ready." Outside, the Tennessee evening was settling in the particular blue-gray of a summer sky, going to dark. And in the little house on Callaway Street, a 5-year-old ate his grilled cheese and told his father about a dream he'd had about an elephant who could fly. And his father sat across from him and listened with his whole body, the way a man listens when he knows that what's in front of him is the only thing in the world that actually matters. And underneath that kitchen table, invisible to every eye in the world, except the ones that had built it carefully over 3 generations, a fortune waited. Patient as stone. Quiet as its owner. Ready. 3 days after the courthouse, Daniel Carter went back to work. That was the thing about him that people never quite understood, the way he could absorb something enormous and still show up the next morning with his coffee in a thermos and his hands already reaching for a wrench before he'd even taken his jacket off. Randy Kowalski, who owned the shop and had known Daniel for going on 9 years, watched him slide under a 17 Silverado at 7:45 that Wednesday morning, and said nothing for a long while. Then he walked over and crouched down beside the lift. "You doing all right?" Randy asked. "Torque converters shot on this one," Daniel said from underneath. "That's not what I asked." A pause. The sound of metal on metal. "I'm good, Randy." Randy stood up and rubbed the back of his neck. He'd been to Daniel's wedding, had held Eli at the hospital when the boy was 3 days old. He knew better than to push. "All right," he said. "Coffee's fresh." "I know, I made it." Randy almost smiled. Almost. He walked back to the front desk and left Daniel to the Silverado and whatever was living underneath his quiet that morning. What was living underneath it was a text message. The same one Daniel had screenshotted and sent to Harriet Folsom 3 nights ago. "We know who you are, Carter." He hadn't responded to it, hadn't told anyone else about it. Not Randy, not his mother, not his younger sister Joanna, who called twice a week from Nashville and would have lost her mind completely if she'd known. He'd just forwarded it to Harriet and waited. And Harriet, who did not panic, had told him they were tracing the number and that he should continue living exactly as he was living and not change a single thing. So he didn't change a single thing. He went to work. He picked Eli up from school. He made dinner. He helped with homework. He read 2 chapters of a book about trucks to a 5-year-old who fell asleep before the end of chapter 1, and then he sat in the kitchen by himself, with the light above the stove, the only thing on, and he thought about the word ready. Harriet had said they were ready. He believed her, but ready for what exactly was still taking shape. He found out on a Thursday. Harriet called at 11 in the morning while he was elbow deep in a brake job. He almost didn't answer. But she only called his cell when it was something that couldn't wait. And he knew the difference between her check-in cadence and her urgent cadence, and this was definitely the second one. He wiped his hands on a shop rag and stepped out the side door into the parking lot. The text came from a prepaid phone, she said without greeting. Bought with cash at a gas station in Cordell, which is 40 minutes from here. But the number was registered through a forwarding service, and that service has a name attached to it that I want you to hear. "Okay," he said. "Marcus Devlin." Daniel went still. The name landed like a hand on the back of his neck. Devlin, as in the same Marcus Devlin who reached out to Victoria's firm 8 months ago about a potential acquisition of Carter Air Services. Harriet let that sit for exactly 2 seconds. He knew about the aviation assets before the divorce was filed, Daniel. Someone told him. He turned slightly so the sun wasn't in his eyes. "Victoria. I don't know that yet. But I know he's not working alone, and I know he moved quickly after the hearing. His attorney filed a third-party business inquiry with the estate registry 2 days ago. He's testing the waters, trying to find out how accessible the assets are while the estate is in a contested legal environment." "It's not in a contested legal environment," Daniel said. "The trusts are sealed." "They are. But he doesn't know the full structure yet. He's fishing." She paused. "Here's what I need you to understand. Whoever is advising him told him the divorce created a window, a period where the holdings might be exposed or restructured. They're trying to move before a court orders full financial disclosure because once that order comes, everything surfaces and the window closes." Daniel leaned back against the building. He said nothing for a moment. In the shop behind him, he could hear Randy laughing at something, a big, easy laugh, the kind that belonged to a man who didn't have anyone sending him anonymous threats about family money. "How long do we have?" Daniel asked. "Before the disclosure order," Harriet said. "The custody evaluation is scheduled to begin in 3 weeks. Standard procedure is that financial disclosure runs parallel to the custody evaluation in contested proceedings. Victoria's attorney will push for disclosure as part of their strategy. They'll argue that your financial picture is relevant to Eli's welfare determination. That's the leverage play. They're going to use the custody evaluation to force my hand. They're going to try," she said. "But here's the thing, Daniel. If we get there first, if we file for voluntary disclosure under seal before they motion for it, we control the terms. We control what the judge sees and in what order. And we potentially make Devlin's window disappear before he can use it. And if we do that," Daniel said slowly, "everything comes out." "Everything comes out," Harriet confirmed. "To the court. To Victoria. To her attorneys." She paused once more. "To the world if anyone talks." The parking lot was quiet. A truck went by on the road out front. Daniel watched it go. "Do it," he said. "You're sure?" "I've been sure since before she laughed in that hallway," he said. "I just needed to know what we were dealing with first." He hung up and went back inside and finished the brake job. He didn't mention the call to Randy. He ate his lunch, a sandwich he'd made that morning, turkey and mustard on wheat, sitting on the tailgate of his truck in the parking lot. And he thought about Marcus Devlin, and he thought about Victoria, and he thought about a 5-year-old boy who was right now sitting in a kindergarten classroom learning to sound out 3-letter words. And he made peace quietly and completely with everything that was about to happen. That afternoon at school, pickup, Eli ran to him across the pavement the way he always did, full sprint, arms wide, no hesitation, and Daniel caught him and swung him up, and Eli said, "I spelled elephant today, Dad, ELEPHANT, the whole thing." Daniel pulled back and looked at him. "The whole thing. Mrs. Garrett put it on the board and everything." "That's a big word, buddy." "I know," Eli said very seriously. "It's the longest one I know." Daniel carried him to the truck and buckled him in and thought, that's what this is for. Right there. That's the whole thing. The next morning, Victoria called. He almost let it go to voicemail. Then he answered. "I heard from Philip," she said. No greeting either. They were past that now. "He said your attorney filed something with the court yesterday." "That's right," Daniel said. "What did she file?" "You'll receive the documentation through Philip," he said. "It's all above board." "Daniel." Her voice shifted, the executive tone dropped just slightly, and underneath it was something more human and more alarmed. "What are you doing? You said you weren't going to fight this." "I'm not fighting," he said. "I'm disclosing." Silence on the line. Then, "Disclosing what?" "My financial picture," he said. "Full voluntary disclosure, under seal for now, but the court will have everything." More silence. He could hear her breathing. He'd slept next to that breathing for 6 years. He knew what it sounded like when she was recalculating. "Why would you voluntarily disclose?" she said. "You have nothing. There's nothing to disclose." And there it was. The assumption spoken out loud, clear as a bell. You have nothing. He'd known it was there, but hearing it said in her voice in that particular flat certainty did something to the space behind his sternum that he hadn't quite expected. Not anger, something older, something that felt like the closing of a door. "Philip will be in touch," Daniel said, and he ended the call. Victoria stared at her phone for a full minute after the line went dead. She was standing in her kitchen in the condo she'd moved into after the separation, sleek and new and spotless, the kind of place that looked like a magazine and felt like no one actually lived there. Her coffee was getting cold on the counter. She called Philip. "He filed voluntary disclosure," she said. "I know," Philip said. "I received the notice 10 minutes ago." "What does that mean?" "What does he have?" "That," Philip said carefully, "is exactly what I am in the process of finding out." Philip. "Victoria, I will call you the moment I know something. In the meantime, I need you to sit tight and not contact him again." A beat. "And I need you to think hard about whether there is anything at all that you might know about Daniel's family, his background, his father's business, that you haven't told me." She paused. "His father had a small aviation company. It closed when Robert died. There wasn't much left." "How do you know there wasn't much left?" Another pause, longer this time. "Because Daniel never—" She stopped. "Because he never talked about it. He never acted like there was anything there." "How much do you actually know about the Carter family estate?" Philip asked. She opened her mouth, closed it. Her coffee was definitely cold now. "Call me when you know something," she said, and hung up. 2 days later, Philip Breck sat at his desk at 6:45 in the morning with the sealed disclosure documents in front of him and a cup of coffee that he was not drinking, and he read through everything Harriet Folsom had filed with the care of a man who was beginning to realize he had badly misread the board. He called Victoria at 7:15. "Are you sitting down?" he said. "Don't do that," she said. "Just tell me." Carter Air Services was not closed when Robert Carter died, Philip said. It was restructured into a holding company called Blue Ridge Aviation Partners, LLC. which is itself a subsidiary umbrella for 6 additional LLCs, operating under a trust instrument established in 2009 and amended twice since. Philip. The aviation assets alone are appraised at $42 million. The logistics interests, fuel distribution contracts across Tennessee, Kentucky, and Western Virginia generated $1.8 million in revenue last fiscal year. There are commercial property holdings in 3 counties. There is a separately administered investment portfolio. He stopped, took a breath. Victoria, the preliminary valuation of the Carter family estate, as disclosed in these documents, is in excess of $230 million. The line was completely silent. Victoria. "I'm here," she said. Her voice had gone to something strange, flat and distant, like a signal losing its frequency. "I need to ask you again," Philip said. "Did you have any knowledge, any indication at all that this structure existed?" "No," she said. And then quieter. "No. I believe you," he said. "But the court is going to ask that question too, and so is the guardian ad litem for Eli. And if there is any evidence, any text, any email, any conversation that suggests someone close to your camp knew and used that knowledge—" "What are you talking about?" she said. "What does that mean?" "It means," Philip said slowly, "that I received a very interesting call this morning from an attorney I don't know representing a man named Marcus Devlin, who apparently has been in contact with someone at your company and who filed a business inquiry 2 weeks ago that now looks extremely ill-timed." He paused. "Is that name familiar to you?" The silence on her end this time had a different texture. "Victoria," he said, "is that name familiar to you?" "He reached out to our acquisitions department," she said. 8 months ago. He was interested in—" She stopped. "He said he was interested in a regional aviation company that was undervalued. He wanted to know if we had the appetite for a partnership arrangement. I passed it to our M&A team. I didn't follow up. I barely remember it." "Did you give him any information about Daniel's family?" "No." Firm. Immediate. "Absolutely not. I didn't know there was information to give." "All right," Philip said. "I believe you, but I need everything, every email, every contact log, every communication between your company and Devlin's people. Because right now, the optics of a third party filing a business inquiry on Carter assets 2 weeks after a divorce hearing are not going to look good. And Daniel Carter's attorney is going to make sure the judge understands the timing." Victoria sat with that for a long moment. Then she said very quietly, "He knew, didn't he? Daniel knew Devlin would come." "I think," Philip said carefully, "that Daniel Carter has been several steps ahead of everyone in this situation for quite some time." That same morning, Harriet Folsom met Daniel at her office, a set of rooms above a dry cleaner on Morrow Street, that looked absolutely nothing like the brain center of a multi-generational family estate management operation, which was exactly how Robert Carter had wanted it. She had a printed copy of the disclosure documents on her desk and a legal pad full of notes. "Devlin's attorney called us this morning," she said. "Fishing expedition, trying to establish whether the disclosure creates any opening for a third-party claim." "Does it?" Daniel asked. "Not even close," she said. "The trust structure is airtight. His only play would be to allege some kind of fraudulent concealment during the marriage, that the assets should have been disclosed as marital property. But the trust predates the marriage by 4 years, and the documentation proves Daniel was a beneficiary before the wedding. There's nothing there." "He's not going to find anything because there's nothing to find," Daniel said. "Correct. But he'll try to generate noise. Noise in a courtroom is expensive and distracting. That's the play." She leaned back. "Which is why I've already filed for a restraining order on third-party interference in the estate proceedings. The judge is going to take one look at the timeline of Devlin's filing and understand exactly what happened." Daniel nodded once. "And the custody evaluation." Harriet's expression changed, softened slightly. "That's where you need to hear me clearly, Daniel. The disclosure changes the dynamic in the custody case. Significantly." How so? Because now the argument isn't about your resources. That argument just disappeared. Now it's about character and stability. And in those categories, she looked at him with the particular directness of a woman who had known his family for over 25 years. You are going to be very difficult to beat. He looked at the table. Outside, somewhere below the window, a car door slammed. Someone laughed. I just want Eli, he said. It was not a complicated sentence. It was the truest thing he knew how to say. I know, Harriet said. That's exactly why you're going to get him. What happened next moved quickly, and the way that truly consequential things often move, not like an explosion, but like a tide, steady and unstoppable, and reshaping everything it touches by the time you notice how far it's come. The guardian ad litem, assigned to Eli, was a woman named Patricia Odom, a former social worker in her mid-50s, with short gray hair and the calm, penetrating attention of someone who had spent decades in rooms where adults were performing and children were telling the truth. She conducted her first home visit at Daniel's house on a Tuesday evening when Eli was home from school. Daniel had been careful not to tell Eli what the visit was about. He'd just said a lady named Ms. Patricia was coming for dinner and she was nice and it was going to be normal. And it was normal because Daniel Carter did not know how to perform normalcy. He just lived it. Eli sat across from Patricia Odom at the kitchen table and told her about Captain the Elephant and about the word he'd learned to spell and about how his dad made the best grilled cheese in Tennessee and maybe the world. But he hadn't tried all the others yet, so he wasn't completely sure. Patricia Odom wrote something in her notepad. She didn't show it to anyone that evening. But later in her report she would write, "The child demonstrates a secure and confident attachment to his father. The home environment is notably warm, consistent, and emotionally attuned. Mr. Carter's parenting style reflects deep attentiveness to the child's emotional needs. The child did not exhibit anxiety or distress during the visit. He spoke freely, laughed easily, and returned to his father physically multiple times with the naturalness of a child who trusts the space completely." Victoria's visit was different. Patricia Odom met her at the condo on a Thursday. The place was clean and ordered and had been clearly prepared for the visit. Fresh flowers on the counter. Eli's drawings arranged on the refrigerator, a picture of the two of them in a frame that looked recently purchased. Eli was quiet during this visit. He answered questions when asked. He did not volunteer stories. He sat beside his mother with the careful stillness of a child, monitoring the temperature of a room. Toward the end, Patricia asked him gently what his favorite thing to do with his mom was. Eli thought about it for a long time. Victoria smiled at him encouragingly. "She reads to me sometimes," he said, "when she's not on her phone." Victoria's smile didn't fall. She held it in place with professional precision. But Patricia Odom saw the thing behind it, the flinch that never made it to the surface, and she wrote that down too. On the drive back to her office, Patricia thought about two different houses, two different temperatures. One child who talked without being asked. One child who answered when spoken to. She thought about what it meant when a 5-year-old's favorite memory had a qualifier in it. When she's not on her phone. She thought about the fact that Daniel Carter, worth more money than most people would see in 10 lifetimes, had no housekeeper, no chef, no hired help of any kind. That he had made dinner himself, that Tuesday evening pasta with garlic bread, and had let Eli stir the sauce and made it seem like the most important job in the world. That his refrigerator had a drawing on it, too slightly crooked, held up with a magnet from a hardware store. A lumpy gray elephant with a long winding trunk. The one Eli had made so Captain wouldn't be lonely. She thought about all of it on that drive, and she thought about what the word home actually meant when you stripped away everything except what a child felt in his body when he was there. And she began writing her recommendation. Patricia Odom filed her guardian ad litem report on a Friday morning, and by Friday afternoon, Philip Breck had read it 3 times. He called Victoria at 4:15. She picked up on the first ring, which told him she'd been waiting. "How bad?" she said. Philip chose his words with the care of a man stepping across ice. "It's not favorable." "How bad, Philip?" "She recommends primary residential custody with the father," he said. Structured visitation for you. Every other weekend. 1 weeknight per month." The line went so quiet he thought for a moment the call had dropped. "That's exactly what Daniel proposed in the first hearing," Victoria said. "Yes," Philip said. "It is." "He knew," she said. "He already knew what the report was going to say before we even started the evaluation." Philip didn't answer that directly, because the honest answer was yes. Daniel Carter had almost certainly known, and saying that out loud wasn't going to help either of them right now. "The report isn't binding," he said instead. "The judge will consider it heavily, but we have the right to contest it. We can bring in our own child psychologist, our own testimony." "Eli told her, 'I'm on my phone too much,'" Victoria said. Philip was quiet. "A 5-year-old, she said. "My own son." Her voice had lost the executive edge completely. What was underneath it was rawer and harder to listen to. "He qualified his favorite memory of me. Did you read that part?" "I read it." "He said when she's not on her phone." She stopped. "What kind of mother gets qualified by her 5-year-old? "Victoria." "Don't," she said. "Don't do the attorney thing right now. Just give me a minute." He gave her the minute. He heard her breathing on the other end of the line, the particular sound of someone holding something together by force of will. Then she said, "What do we do?" "We prepare for the full disclosure hearing," Philip said. "That's in 11 days. Judge Tate is going to have the complete financial picture in front of her, and she's going to ask questions. Our best position is to demonstrate that you were unaware of the asset structure, that you had no connection to Devlin's inquiry, and that your interest in primary custody is genuinely about Eli, and not about the financial landscape." "It was always about Eli," she said quietly. "I know that," Philip said. "But the optics created by Devlin's filing make that harder to establish, which is why I need everything from your M&A team by Monday. Every email, every contact log, everything."
Mostly.
After she hung up, Victoria stood in her kitchen for a long time without moving. The flowers she'd bought for Patricia Odom's visit were still on the counter. She hadn't thrown them out yet. She didn't know why. She looked at them now and thought about a 5-year-old stirring pasta sauce in a kitchen that smelled like garlic bread, telling a stranger that his dad made the best grilled cheese in maybe the whole world. She thought about Daniel walking out of the courthouse in his flannel shirt and his Wolverine boots and getting into a truck with a cracked mirror. She thought about how she had laughed. That small, exhaled laugh in the corridor, the one that had felt like the most natural thing in the world. In that moment, the obvious automatic response of a woman who believed she was watching someone smaller than her walk away from something he didn't understand. She had been so sure. The certainty of it sat in her chest now like a stone. Across town, Daniel was at Randy's when Harriet called. "The report's in," she said. "Patricia Odom recommends primary with you." He sat down on an overturned crate near the tool bench. Not from weakness, just because it felt like the right posture for the moment. "How's it worded?" "Strongly," Harriet said. She cited consistent emotional attunement, secure attachment, stable home environment. She noted that the child demonstrated free, unprompted communication with you in a way he did not demonstrate with his mother. A pause. She also noted the drawing on your refrigerator. Daniel rubbed the back of his neck. "The elephant." "The elephant," Harriet confirmed. "It's in the report." She called it evidence of attentive, child-centered parenting. Another pause, and her voice did something it almost never did. It softened slightly. "Robert would have been very proud, Daniel." He didn't say anything for a moment. Through the open shop door, he could hear Randy's radio playing something country and old, the kind of song that felt like it came from a place that still made sense. "What's next?" he said. "The disclosure hearing," she said. 11 days. That's where everything becomes public record. Are you ready for that?" "You asked me that before," he said. "I'm asking again. Because once Judge Tate reads those numbers into the record, there is no version of this where you're the mechanic with nothing anymore. Everyone in that courtroom, everyone connected to this case, and potentially anyone who knows anyone connected to this case will know exactly who you are. He thought about Eli spelling elephant at school. E-L-E-P-H-A-N-T. The whole thing. Mrs. Garrett put it on the board. Let them know, he said. Why? The 11 days move the way days move when something large is approaching too fast in the moment and too slow in the waiting. Daniel worked his shifts at Randy's. He picked Eli up from school. He helped with homework. He made dinner. He read the truck book and the elephant book, and a new one about a dog who learned to fly that Eli had picked from the library and was completely obsessed with. He texted Harriet when there were updates, and she texted back in her precise, no punctuation wasted style that told him exactly what he needed to know and nothing extra. On the 8th day, something happened that nobody had planned for. Daniel's phone rang at 11 at night, a number he recognized as local but didn't have saved. He almost didn't answer. He answered. Mr. Carter. A man's voice. Careful, not threatening, but calculated. My name is Marcus Devlin. I think it's time we talk directly. Daniel said nothing. He let the silence sit. I understand that's probably not what you want to hear from me. Devlin continued. I also understand that my attorney's filing didn't go unnoticed. I want you to know that was a misunderstanding, a miscalculation on my part. I was operating on incomplete information. Is that right? Daniel said. I didn't know the full picture of your estate structure, Devlin said. I was told, and I won't say by whom right now, that there might be an opportunity in the transition period. I should have done more due diligence before I acted. What do you want, Mr. Devlin? A pause. I want to make this right. I have resources. I have connections in the aviation sector. Carter Air Services Blue Ridge, whatever it's called now, is a genuinely valuable operation, and I believe there are partnership structures that could benefit both of us significantly. I'm not your enemy here. You sent me a threatening text, Daniel said. His voice was completely even. You told me smart men don't let things get messy in open courtrooms. Silence from Devlin's end. I didn't send that text, Devlin said. I want to be clear about that. Someone acting without my knowledge. Who? Daniel said. Another pause. Longer. Someone who had access to information about your situation that they shouldn't have had. Someone who was trying to accelerate the timeline on my behalf without my authorization. He stopped. I fired that person this morning. Daniel stood in his kitchen in the dark. The stove light was on. The drawing of the elephant was on the refrigerator. Everything in the house was quiet, except the refrigerator hum and the sound of Devlin breathing on the other end of the phone. Mr. Devlin, Daniel said, in 3 days a federal court is going to receive full documentation of your filing, the timing of that filing relative to my divorce hearing, and the text message that was sent to me from a prepaid phone purchased 40 minutes from here. My attorney has already established the evidentiary chain. Whatever you fire, whoever you fire between now and then doesn't change what's in that chain. Devlin said nothing. I'm going to suggest, Daniel continued quietly, that you talk to your attorney first thing tomorrow morning about withdrawing the third-party inquiry voluntarily, before the hearing. Because the alternative is that Judge Tate reviews the whole picture in open court, and I don't think either of us wants that timeline in the public record. A long silence. That's a reasonable position, Devlin said finally. His voice had changed. The calculation was still there, but the confidence underneath it had shifted into something more careful. I'll make the call. Good night, Mr. Devlin, Daniel said. He set the phone down on the counter, stood there for a moment. Then he took out his phone and typed a message to Harriet Devlin called. Thinks he's withdrawing the filing tomorrow. Keep the chain ready anyway. Her response came back in 3 minutes. Already have it. Sleep well. He almost smiled. He turned off the stove light and went to bed. The morning of the disclosure hearing, Daniel wore the same flannel shirt. Not because he hadn't thought about it, he had for about 4 seconds, but because the flannel was clean and pressed and fit him right. and he had never once in his life dressed for a room's expectations. He drove the F-150. He got there 8 minutes early and sat in the corridor on the same wooden bench where he'd sat before, with his hands folded between his knees, watching the hallway fill up. There were more people this time. Philip Breck arrived with a second attorney. Daniel didn't recognize a woman with a briefcase and the particular focus of someone called in for a specific situation. 2 paralegals. Victoria arrived in a gray suit, this time quieter than before. No visible contempt in her posture. Just a kind of careful stillness that told Daniel she had spent the last 11 days recalibrating. Their eyes met in the hallway. She held the look for a moment. He nodded once. She looked away. Harriet arrived last, which was her way, never early, never late, carrying a single leather folio that looked like it had been made sometime in the 1980s and had never needed replacing. She sat beside Daniel on the bench. "Devlin withdrew," she said quietly. "I know." "The judge has the full disclosure packet. She's reviewed it in chambers." "Okay," he said. "Daniel." She turned to look at him. "Whatever happens in that room today, whatever you see on people's faces, whatever is said, I need you to just be exactly who you are. Do you understand me? Don't explain it. Don't apologize for it. Just be who you are." "That's all I've ever been," he said. She studied him for a moment with those 25 years of knowing this family eyes. "I know," she said. "That's exactly why we're going to be fine." They were called in at 9:15. Judge Eleanor Tate sat behind the bench with the same reading glasses on the same beaded chain and the same quality of attention that made the room feel like it was being measured and found accountable. She looked at the people assembled before her with the patience of a woman who had presided over enough human folly to be surprised by very little. "We are here today for full financial disclosure in the matter of Carter versus Carter," she said. "Both parties are present, both counsel are present, and I want to establish at the outset that this proceeding is sealed. The financial documentation entered into record today is confidential to these proceedings pending further order of this court." She looked up from her papers. "Is that understood by all parties?" A unified yes moved around the room. "Good." She opened the folio in front of her. She looked at it for a moment. Then she looked at Daniel Carter, and for just a fraction of a second, something moved behind her eyes. Not surprise exactly, because Eleanor Tate was too experienced for surprise, but a kind of recalibration that was visible if you knew what you were looking for. "Mr. Carter," she said, "I've had the opportunity to review the voluntary disclosure filed by your attorney on your behalf. I have some questions." "Yes, ma'am," he said. "The trust instrument establishing Blue Ridge Aviation Partners was created in 2009. "Yes, ma'am." 4 years before your marriage to Ms. Harlow. "Yes, ma'am." "And you have been the named primary beneficiary of this trust since its inception." "Yes, ma'am." She looked at the documents again. "The preliminary valuation figures included in this disclosure, which your attorney has indicated are conservative, place the total estate value at approximately $231 million. The room did not make a sound. It was the particular silence of a space in which several people are working very hard not to react. Philip Breck was looking at his legal pad. His pen was not moving. Victoria was looking straight ahead at a fixed point above the judge's head. The second attorney Philip had brought in had gone completely still. "Yes, ma'am," Daniel said. His voice did not change. His posture did not change. He sat in the courtroom in his flannel shirt and his Wolverine boots and confirmed that he was worth $231 million, with the same affect he used to confirm a break job estimate. Judge Tate looked at him for a moment. Then she looked at Victoria. "Ms. Harlow," she said, "you are on record as having had no knowledge of the scope or structure of these assets during the course of the marriage." Victoria's attorney, the woman with the briefcase, began to rise. Victoria put a hand on her arm and stopped her. "That's correct," Victoria said directly. "I had no knowledge." And you confirm that you have no connection, direct or indirect, to the third-party inquiry filed by Marcus Devlin, which was subsequently withdrawn this morning. No connection, Victoria said. None. Judge Tate held her gaze for a moment longer than was strictly necessary. It was the look of a judge deciding whether she believed what she was hearing. Then she looked back at her papers. I will note for the record, Judge Tate said, that the withdrawal of the Devlin filing this morning, while noted, does not remove its relevance to these proceedings. This court is aware of its timing. This court is also aware that an anonymous threat was communicated to Mr. Carter in the period following the initial hearing, and that the evidentiary chain provided by Mr. Carter's counsel establishes a connection to individuals associated with Devlin's operation. She paused. That matter will be referred for separate investigation. Is that clear? Yes, Your Honor, Harriet said. Yes, Your Honor, Philip said somewhat more quietly. Good. Judge Tate set the folio down and leaned back. Now, let's talk about what this disclosure means for the custody determination, because that is ultimately why we are here. She looked at Daniel. Mr. Carter, you have managed a multi-generational family estate of significant value while living modestly, maintaining consistent employment in a hands-on trade, and serving as the primary emotional caregiver for your son. Is there a reason you made those choices? Daniel thought about his father sitting on the porch in Dunmore saying, money's a tool, you don't walk around talking about your hammer. He thought about Harriet Folsom, 25 years of managing quiet and careful power. He thought about Eli running across school pavement with his arms wide open, no hesitation, no calculation, just love in motion. My son needed a father, Daniel said, not a portfolio. The room stayed quiet. Judge Tate looked at him for a moment that stretched past professional into something more human. Mr. Carter, she said, I've been on this bench for 19 years. I have presided over a great many contested matters involving family wealth. She paused. I don't believe I have ever seen a voluntary disclosure filed proactively under seal with supporting documentation this thorough by a party who stood to benefit from continued concealment. She looked at her papers once more. Your counsel is to be commended. Harriet, to her credit, did not move a muscle. The Guardian ad litem report is already in evidence, Judge Tate continued. Combined with today's disclosure, I am prepared to move toward a preliminary custody recommendation at this time, rather than scheduling an additional hearing. Both parties should understand that this is unusual and reflects the clarity of the picture before this court. She looked at Philip Breck. Counsel, do you have objection to proceeding on this basis? Philip looked at Victoria. Something passed between them, a question, and then an answer, and then something that looked like resignation, but was cleaner than that. Like a person finally putting down something too heavy. No objection, Your Honor, Philip said. Judge Tate looked at the room one more time. Then she picked up her pen. Primary residential custody of the minor child Elias Carter is awarded to the father, Daniel Robert Carter, she said. Structured visitation for the mother to be established per the Guardian ad litem's recommendations. Child support calculations to be revisited in light of the disclosed financial picture. This court will schedule a follow-up in 60 days to review the transition. She set the pen down. Mr. Carter, you are responsible for ensuring your son has consistent, meaningful access to his mother. This court expects that you will take that responsibility as seriously as you have taken every other one. I will, Daniel said. I believe you, Judge Tate said. And she meant it. Afterward, in the corridor, Victoria found Daniel at the window again. Same window as before. Same parking lot below. She came to stand beside him without being asked, and they both looked out for a moment without speaking, the way people sometimes do when the words haven't caught up to the moment yet. Then Victoria said, $231 million. Roughly, Daniel said. She was quiet for the moment. You fixed my car, she said. When the alternator went out, 2 years into the marriage, You fixed it yourself in the driveway on a Saturday morning, and I made a joke about it." She paused. "I said something like at least one of us is useful." He remembered. He didn't say so. "I thought I was being funny," she said. "I think I was also being not kind." She stopped. "I don't think I was kind to you very often toward the end." He looked at the parking lot. A woman was loading groceries into a minivan. A kid was helping her, maybe 7 or 8 years old, carrying a bag that was too big for him, but insisting anyway. "You weren't," Daniel said. It wasn't an accusation. It was just the truth, said without ceremony. Victoria nodded once. "I'm sorry," she said. "No." He looked at her. She was looking straight ahead, jaw set, the way a person looks when they're saying something hard and need to get through it without it costing more than they have. "I know," he said. "I want to be better with Eli," she said. I want the qualifier to go away. I don't want to be the mom he qualifies." "Then put the phone down," Daniel said simply. She almost flinched. Then quietly she almost laughed. Not the laugh from the corridor last time, nothing like that. Something smaller and more honest. The laugh of someone who has just been handed a truth they already knew and are finally willing to hold it. "Yeah," she said. "I know." They stood there another moment. Below them, the kid with the grocery bag had made it to the minivan and was very proud of himself. "He spelled elephant last week," Daniel said. "The whole word. ELEPHANT. Victoria looked at him. Something crossed her face that was beyond analysis. Just a mother hearing about her child and feeling it land in the place where all the status and strategy and performance fell away, and there was nothing left but love, simple and aching and real. "He told me," she said. "He texted me. Well, he had my mother help him text me." She paused. "I cried for 10 minutes. Daniel nodded. "He's a good kid." "He's a great kid," Victoria said. "He's great because of you." Daniel was quiet for a moment. Then, "He's great because of himself. We just try to make enough room for him to figure that out." She looked at him one more time, really looked the way she hadn't in a long time. The way you look at someone when you've stopped trying to fit them into a category and you're just seeing them. The mechanic. The quiet man. The father in the flannel shirt. The man worth $231 million who fixed his own truck and made grilled cheese on Tuesday nights and put a child's drawing on the refrigerator with a hardware store magnet. Who he was had never changed. She was the one who had stopped seeing it. The 60-day review hearing was scheduled for a Thursday in late October, and the world between that corridor conversation and that Thursday was not quiet. It started with a leak. Nobody ever found out exactly who talked, whether it was a paralegal, a court clerk, someone in Devlin's circle trying to create leverage after the withdrawal, or just the particular way that small towns process large secrets. But 9 days after the disclosure hearing, a local news blog called the Hargrove County Recorder posted a brief item under the headline, "Local Mechanic Revealed as Multimillionaire in Divorce Proceedings." The item was short, barely 4 paragraphs, but it had the specific gravity of a stone dropped into still water. By the next morning, it had been picked up by 3 regional outlets. By the morning after that, a national aggregator had repackaged it under a headline that read, "He drove a beater truck to court. He was worth $231 million. Daniel found out when Randy called him at 6:45 in the morning before the shop opened. "You want to tell me something," Randy said. "Probably not on the phone," Daniel said. "There's a reporter in the parking lot," Randy said, "standing next to a van with a satellite dish on it." Daniel closed his eyes for exactly 3 seconds. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. "Take your time," Randy said. "She's drinking coffee. She looks patient." He was there in 18. The reporter, a woman in her late 30s named Claire Ashby from the Knoxville affiliate, was indeed patient. She was also good at her job, which meant she didn't ambush him in the parking lot. She walked toward him with her hands visible and said, "Mr. Carter, I'd just like 5 minutes. Off the record if you prefer." "I don't prefer off of the record," he said, "because off the record means you can still use it, just without attribution." He looked at her directly. "I'm not giving a statement. The proceedings are sealed, and I intend to respect that." He started toward the shop door. "Can you confirm whether the figure reported is accurate?" she called after him. He stopped, turned around once. "I can confirm that I'm going to fix a 2020 Jeep Wrangler this morning that needs a new alternator," he said. "That's what I can confirm." He went inside. Randy was standing at the front desk with a cup of coffee and an expression that had moved well past surprised and into something that looked like awe mixed with mild personal offense. $231 million, Randy said. "Give or take," Daniel said. "You've been working here for 9 years. Yes. You show up at 7. You make the coffee. You fixed my truck for free twice. Third time I charged you," Daniel said. "Transmission's expensive." Randy stared at him. "Why?" he finally said. Not angrily, not accusingly, just why? The genuine human confusion of a man who cannot reconcile the person he thought he knew with the information he has just received. Daniel poured himself a coffee. He thought about how to explain something that was so fundamental to him, it had never required explanation before. "Because I'm good at it," he said. "Because it matters to do something real with your hands. Because my son sees me go to work every morning and knows that his father earns what he has." He looked at Randy. "Money doesn't change what's worth doing. It just changes what people think you have to do." Randy was quiet for the long moment. Then he picked up his own coffee and said, "You're still making the coffee every morning?" "That's not a question," Daniel said. "No," Randy agreed. "It's a statement of fact." They opened the shop at 7. The reporter was gone by 8. 2 others arrived by 10. Daniel didn't speak to any of them. Harriet had issued a brief statement on his behalf by mid-morning, 3 sentences confirming that all proceedings were sealed, that Mr. Carter respected the court's confidentiality requirements, and that he had no public comment at this time. It was the statement of a woman who had been managing the Carter family's public silence for 25 years and was very good at it. But the story was already moving, and stories of that particular shape, quiet man, hidden fortune, courthouse revelation, move fast and far, and they don't stop because you decline to comment. Victoria called at noon. He was eating his sandwich in the parking lot again, his phone face up on the tailgate. "Have you seen the coverage?" she said. "I've been made aware of it," he said. "Philip is getting calls," she said. "My company is getting calls. My director of communications called me this morning to ask if I have a statement." A pause. "Daniel, I look like in this narrative that's forming out there, I look like the villain." He took a bite of his sandwich, said nothing. "I know I don't have the right to ask you for anything right now," she said. "I know that. But whatever you say publicly, if you say anything, I'm asking you to be accurate. I didn't know about the money. I want that on the record somewhere." "I know you didn't know," he said. "Then say that. If someone asks, Victoria." He set the sandwich down. "I have never said anything publicly that wasn't accurate, and I don't plan to start." He paused. "If someone asks me directly whether you knew, I'll tell them the truth. You didn't." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "Thank you." "Don't thank me for being honest," he said. "That's just what people are supposed to do." After he hung up, he sat on the tailgate for a while. A car pulled into the lot, a guy named Walt, who brought his Civic in every 6 months without fail. Walt got out and stopped when he saw Daniel. "I read the thing online," Walt said. "Yeah," Daniel said. "You still gonna do my oil change?" Walt asked. Daniel almost laughed. "That's why I'm here, Walt." "Good," Walt said. "Because I don't want to find a new mechanic. The guy on Morrison Street charges 20 more, and he's never on time. He took Walt's keys and went back inside and did the oil change. And for that 45 minutes with his hands in something real, and the radio playing, and Randy arguing with someone on the phone about a parts order, the world was exactly the size it was supposed to be. The twist that nobody had prepared for arrived on a Tuesday, 17 days after the story broke. Harriet called at 2 in the afternoon. He was test driving a pickup after a transmission rebuild and had to pull over. "I need you to come to the office," she said. "What happened?" "Someone filed a legal challenge to the trust," she said. Her voice had a quality he'd heard exactly twice before in 25 years of knowing her. Not panic. Harriet Folsom did not panic, but a concentrated urgency that meant the situation had grown a new dimension. "Who?" he said. "A woman named Sandra Voss," Harriet said. "She's filed a claim alleging that she is the biological daughter of Robert Carter, and therefore a rightful heir to the estate." The truck was pulled over on a county road with fields on both sides and blue October sky overhead. Daniel sat in the cab and said nothing for a full 5 seconds. "A daughter," he said. "That's the claim," Harriet said. "I want you to hear me clearly. I have no idea yet whether this claim has any merit. Claims like this emerge after public disclosure. They happen. Most of them have no legal foundation. But this one is different." "Different how?" A pause. "Because Sandra Voss has documentation. She has a birth certificate listing Robert Carter as father. She has photographs. She has letters." Another pause. "And she has a DNA test, Daniel, taken 3 years ago before Robert died. She reached out to him directly. They met twice." The field outside was still. A hawk was circling something way out. "He knew," Daniel said. It wasn't a question. "He knew," Harriet confirmed. "And he didn't tell you." And the drive to Harriet's office took 22 minutes. He did it in 19. He sat across from her at her desk that looked out over Morrow Street, and she handed him a folder, and he read through it with the careful attention he gave to anything that mattered, and when he finished, he closed the folder and set it on her desk. "She's 41, he said. "Born when my father was 26. "Before he met your mother," Harriet said. "By 2 years. He was with someone else. A woman named Helen Voss. They were together briefly. She moved away. He didn't know about the pregnancy." She paused. "According to the letters Sandra gave her attorney, Robert discovered the truth 3 years ago when she found him through a genealogy service. They corresponded for several months. They met in person twice, once in Nashville, once here." "Where was I?" Daniel said. "He didn't tell you," Harriet said simply. "I don't know why. I have my guesses." "Tell me your guesses." She looked at him with those careful eyes. "He was ashamed," she said. "Not of Sandra, of the situation, of the fact that he'd had no idea for 40 years that a child of his existed. He was also, I think, trying to figure out how to tell you. And then he ran out of time." Daniel looked at the window. A truck went by on Morrow Street. Then another. "Is she legitimate?" he said. "Legally. The DNA is solid. The documentation is solid. The claim itself, whether it entitles her to a share of the estate, is going to depend on how the trust instrument handles undisclosed heirs." She opened her own folder. "Here's the complicated part. Your father amended the trust twice. The second amendment, made 14 months before he died, includes a clause, and I need you to listen to the exact language here." She found the page. Quote, "In the event that an heir previously unknown to the trustee is identified and verified through lawful means during or after the trustee's lifetime, such heir shall be considered for equitable inclusion as determined by the primary beneficiary at his sole discretion." End quote. Daniel stared at her. "He wrote her in," Daniel said slowly. "He didn't name her, but he wrote a door open for her. And he gave you the key," Harriet said. "The decision is yours, entirely. Legally, you have no obligation to give Sandra Voss anything. The clause says considered for equitable inclusion at your sole discretion. You could decline. She'd have limited recourse. Her attorney knows this, which is why they filed a legal challenge rather than a direct inheritance claim. They're trying to force the court to interpret the clause more broadly. Will it work? Probably not, Harriet said. But it will cost money and time, and it will be in the public record. She folded her hands. Or you could meet with her. Before the hearing. Before the hearing, she said, and decide for yourself. He sat with that. The hawk outside was gone. The sky was very blue. Set it up, he said. Sandra Voss arrived at Harriet's office on a Friday morning. Daniel was already there when she came in. He stood when she entered the room, and she stopped just inside the door, and they looked at each other across the space of a professional office and 41 years of completely separate lives. She was medium height with dark hair going gray at the temples and a face that, when he looked at it carefully, contained something he recognized without being able to name it for a moment. Then he placed it. Around the eyes. The set of the jaw. The same particular stillness. She looked like his father. Not dramatically. Not like a movie revelation, but in the quiet way that family resemblance works a structural similarity in the bones that you couldn't manufacture or mistake. Mr. Carter, she said. Her voice was steady, but her hands were not entirely. She was holding a folder, and her knuckles were slightly pale. Daniel, he said, please sit down. She sat. He sat. Harriet sat at the edge of the desk and said nothing, which was her particular gift. I want to say something before anything else, Sandra said. I didn't file that legal challenge to cause damage. My attorney recommended it as a protective measure after the public disclosure. I want you to know that what I actually want... She stopped, took a breath. What I actually wanted from the beginning was just to know if he was real. If the man in those letters was real. If I was real to him. Daniel looked at her. What did the letters say? She opened her folder. She pulled out a single page, a photocopy, the original clearly preserved somewhere carefully, and slid it across to him. He recognized the handwriting immediately. His father's block print. The same print he'd learned to write in himself, copying it off grocery lists and repair notes and birthday cards growing up, not knowing he was learning someone else's hand. He read it. It was not long. Robert Carter had not been a man who used 20 words when 10 would serve. But the 10 words in that letter were the kind that didn't leave you. He read it twice and set it down. He was real, Daniel said. He was exactly what those letters say he was. Sandra nodded once. Her jaw moved. I'm not here for the money, she said. I want to say that, and have you believe me, even though I know I have no right to ask you to believe anything I say. I believe you, he said. She looked up. Why? Because you led with the letter, he said. Not the legal filing, the letter. He looked at the photocopy on the desk between them. Someone who's here for the money leads with the legal filing. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, he talked about you. In the letters. He said you were the one who understood what the money was for. What did he say it was for? Daniel asked, though he already knew. He said it was for building something that lasts longer than you do, Sandra said. He said the point of having it was to make sure the people who came after you had a foundation, not a free ride. She paused. He said you understood that better than he ever taught it to you, that you figured it out yourself. Daniel sat with that for a moment that was longer than it appeared from the outside. His father, 25 years of quiet conversations and careful lessons, and never once saying, I'm proud of you, because Robert Carter showed things instead of saying them. His father amending a trust 14 months before his death to leave a door open for a daughter he'd only just found. His father writing letters that his son was reading for the first time in a lawyer's office on a Friday morning in October. I'm going to need some time, Daniel said finally. Sandra nodded immediately. Of course. Not about whether, he said carefully. About how. The how matters. She looked at him, and in that look was something that moved across her face too fast to fully name. But it was the particular expression of someone who has been holding their breath for a very long time and has just been told they can exhale. Not relief exactly, something larger, the feeling of being seen as a person rather than a problem. "Thank you," she said. "Don't thank me yet," he said, but not unkindly. After Sandra left, Harriet looked at Daniel for a long moment. "You already know what you're going to do," she said. "Yes," he said. "You want to tell me?" "Not yet," he said. "I want to sit with it first. The way my father should have sat with it instead of keeping it to himself until it was too late." Harriet nodded slowly. "That's fair." He stood and picked up his jacket. "Did he ever talk to you about her while it was happening?" She was quiet for a moment. A deliberate quiet, the kind that means someone is deciding how much truth the moment requires. "He asked me once," she said carefully, "whether the trust amendment he wanted to make was legally sound. I told him it was. He didn't explain why he wanted it. And I didn't ask. Because I knew Robert well enough to know that if he wanted me to know, he would have told me." Daniel looked at her. "But you guessed." "I suspected," she said. "There's a difference. Did you know she'd come—" Another careful pause. "I thought it was possible. After the disclosure went public." She looked at him directly. "I should have warned you that it was possible. I'm sorry I didn't." It was the first time in 25 years he had heard Harriet Folsom apologize for anything. He looked at her for a moment and thought about all the years of careful management, all the decisions she had made to protect what his father built, all the things she had carried quietly and without complaint. "You've done right by this family," he said, "for a long time." She looked away briefly, then back. "Go home to your son," she said. "The hearing is in 3 weeks. We have work to do." He went home. He picked Eli up from school. Eli ran across the pavement with his arms out, same as always, full sprint. No hesitation, the pure physics of a child who has never had reason to hold himself back from the people he loves. Daniel caught him and swung him up. "Dad," Eli said, "Marcus at school said you're famous." Daniel looked at him. "What do you think about that?" Eli considered it with great seriousness. "I think Marcus talks too much," he said. "Also, are we still having pasta tonight?" "We're still having pasta," Daniel said. "Good," Eli said, "because I want to stir." He drove home. He made pasta. He let Eli stir the sauce and made it the most important job in the world. He read 2 chapters of the Dog Who Flies book, and Eli was asleep before the end of chapter 2, this time, which was progress. Then he sat in the kitchen with the stove light on and thought about his father, about letters, about doors left open, about the word foundation and what it meant to build one. Then he picked up his phone and called a number he'd gotten from Harriet that afternoon. Sandra Voss answered on the 3rd ring. "I have a proposal," Daniel said. "I want to tell you about it before it goes to any attorney." A pause. "Okay," she said. "My father wrote a clause," he said, "that gave me a choice. I've made it. But before I tell you what it is, I need to ask you something directly." "Ask?" she said. "Do you have children?" A brief silence. "A daughter," she said. "She's 16. "What's her name?" Another pause, this one softer, like someone surprised by the question. "Eleanor," she said. "We call her Ellie." Daniel looked at the elephant drawing on the refrigerator. The lumpy gray shape, the long winding trunk, made so Captain wouldn't be lonely. "Okay," he said. "Here's what I'm thinking." And he told her, all of it. What he intended to do and why, and what his father had meant when he wrote that amendment, what Daniel believed he had meant anyway. He told her about his father's hands, and his father's words, and his father's way of showing things instead of saying them. He told her about the foundation, and what it was built for. Sandra Voss was quiet for a long time after he finished. Then she said, "He raised you right." "He tried," Daniel said. "I did the rest." "No," she said gently. "I've read enough of those letters to know. He tried very hard. He just didn't always know how to say it." A pause. "Some of it sounds familiar." Daniel almost said something. Then he didn't. Some things didn't need words yet. "I'll have Harriet draw up the paperwork," he said. "You'll hear from her Monday." "Daniel," Sandra said. Then she stopped, like she'd started a sentence and couldn't find the rest of it. "It's all right," he said. "We have time." "Nay." He hung up. The kitchen was quiet. The stove light was warm. Upstairs, a 5-year-old was asleep with a stuffed elephant named Captain, and outside the October night was doing what October nights do in Tennessee, going deep and cool and full of the smell of things changing. Daniel Carter sat in his kitchen in the house he'd bought with his own earned money and thought about his father and about doors and about what a man leaves behind when he's gone, and he understood in the way that understanding sometimes arrives not like a thought, but like a settling, like the ground-finding level that the fortune his father had built was never really about money at all. It was about this: the choice you make when no one is making you, the door you open when no one can see you open it, the version of yourself you become in the quiet when the world is asleep and the stove light is on, and you are the only one accountable to the decision. That was the inheritance, all of it. The money was just the proof of what was already there. Harriet filed the paperwork on Monday, the way she said she would, and by Wednesday morning, Sandra Voss had called her attorney and withdrawn the legal challenge entirely. No negotiation, no counterproposal, no extended back and forth the way these things usually go when lawyers are involved and money is on the table. Just a clean, complete withdrawal filed before 10 in the morning, 2.5 weeks before the 60-day review hearing. Philip Breck heard about it before noon. He called Victoria immediately. "The Voss challenge is gone," he said. "Gone how?" Victoria said. "Withdrawn. Voluntarily. No settlement announced, no terms disclosed." A pause. "Which means whatever Daniel offered her she accepted without condition." Victoria was quiet for a moment. "Or he didn't offer her money at all," she said slowly. "That would be unusual," Philip said. "So is everything else about this man," Victoria said. And there was nothing sharp in it anymore. Just the plain recognition of someone who had finally stopped being surprised by the accuracy of that statement. What Daniel had offered Sandra Voss was not nothing. It was also not what anyone looking at the size of the estate would have expected. He had offered her a formally structured acknowledgement, a legal document that named her as Robert Carter's biological daughter, entered into the family record carrying no shame and no asterisk. He had offered Eleanor, her 16-year-old daughter, a fully funded education trust college graduate school, whatever she chose covered completely. And he had offered Sandra herself a modest but genuine annual distribution from the estate, not as an inheritance claim, but as what the document Harriet drafted called a recognition of family. Not a fortune. Not a windfall. Enough to matter without being enough to change who she was. Sandra had read the offer twice, and then called her attorney and said simply, "Withdraw it all." Her attorney had asked if she was certain she had said yes. And then she had said something her attorney remembered later. "He's not buying my silence. He's just being decent. There's a difference, and I know which one this is." Daniel found out the withdrawal was official when Harriet sent him a 2-word text at 10:17 that Wednesday morning. "It's done." No. He read it, standing next to a 19 Ford Explorer that needed new rotors. He put his phone back in his pocket and went back to work. Randy watched him from the doorway of the office. Said nothing. Just watched the way a man watches something he doesn't fully understand, but respects completely. At lunch, he came out and sat on the tailgate beside Daniel. "The news van hasn't been back in 4 days," Randy said. "I know," Daniel said. You think it's over the media thing? For now, Daniel said. Something else will come along. It always does. Randy was quiet for a moment. Then, I want to ask you something, and I want you to know you don't have to answer it. Okay, Daniel said. Did you ever think about leaving? Randy said. The shop, I mean, after everything came out. You've got... He stopped, because even now the number was hard to say out loud between two people sitting on a tailgate, eating sandwiches. You've got everything. You could go anywhere, do anything. Why are you still here at 7 in the morning making coffee and fixing Explorers? Daniel chewed, swallowed. Thought about it with the seriousness the question deserved. My son knows where I go every morning, he said finally. He knows what I do. He knows I come home at the end of the day with grease on my hands, and I'm not embarrassed by it. He knows work is something you show up for. He looked at the Explorer. If I stop doing this, what does he learn instead? Randy sat with that. That you're rich, he said. He already knows that, Daniel said. Half his kindergarten class told him. I want him to know something more important. Which is, that rich is not who you are, Daniel said. It's just something you have. Randy was quiet for a long time. Then he finished his sandwich, crumpled the paper bag, and stood up. I'm giving you a raise, he said. Daniel looked at him. Randy. Don't argue with me, Randy said. It's been 9 years. It's embarrassing at this point. Daniel almost smiled. Fine. 5%. Make it 3 and we'll call it square, Daniel said. Randy pointed at him. You are the strangest rich man I have ever met. I'm the only rich man you've ever met, Daniel said. That's true, Randy agreed, and he went back inside. The 60-day review hearing was on a Thursday, and the morning of it was the first morning in 6 weeks that felt different from all the mornings before it. Not because Daniel did anything different. He woke at 5:30, made coffee, sat at the kitchen table in the quiet before the house stirred. But there was something in the quality of the quiet that morning that was different. Not tension, more like completion, the feeling of a long note finally resolving. Eli came downstairs at 6:25 after his alarm, dragging Captain by the trunk. Is today the day? Eli said. Daniel looked at him across the kitchen table. What day? The day you told me about, Eli said. The important day. He'd told Eli there was a hearing. He'd kept it simple, told him the judge was going to make something official. He hadn't used the word custody because 5-year-olds shouldn't have to carry that word. Yeah, buddy, he said. Today's the day. Eli put Captain on the chair beside him and climbed into his own seat. Are you nervous? No, Daniel said. Eli studied him with those quiet, watchful eyes. Me neither, he said, like a man confirming something they both already knew. Then, can I have the cereal with the strawberries? Already on the counter, Daniel said. Eli looked. There it was. He turned back to his father and gave him a look that a 5-year-old gives when they are very satisfied with the world. Good, he said. They ate breakfast together. Daniel took Eli to school. At the door, Eli hugged him the way he always did. Both arms full commitment, no hesitation, and then pulled back and looked up. Dad, he said, you're gonna win. Daniel crouched down to his level. It's not about winning, bud. I know, Eli said. But you're gonna anyway. He went inside. Daniel watched until the door closed behind him. Then he got in the truck and drove to the courthouse. Everyone was assembled in the courtroom by 9. Philip Breck was there, but the second attorney was gone. The situation had simplified enough that she wasn't needed. Victoria sat at her table with a posture that was different from every previous hearing. Not the executive certainty of the first day, not the careful performance of the disclosure hearing. She sat like someone who had come to a place they'd stopped trying to control and were just going to be present in. Patricia Odom was there on the side of the room with the guardian ad litem's table. She had a copy of her report in front of her and a pen she didn't use. Harriet sat beside Daniel with her leather folio and her 9-decade-old stillness. Judge Eleanor Tate came in, and everyone stood and sat, and then the room settled. "This is the 60-day review in Carter versus Carter," she said. "We are here to finalize the custody determination and related orders." She looked at both tables. "Before I proceed, I want to address the Voss matter." She looked at the paperwork in front of her. The third-party challenge was withdrawn 3 weeks ago. The court notes this resolution and considers the matter closed. She set that page aside. "I also want to note for the record that the court is aware of the media coverage that followed the financial disclosure. This court takes a dim view of sealed proceedings becoming public." She looked at both attorneys with equal measure. "If the source of that leak is ever identified, this court will respond accordingly." Neither attorney said anything, which was the right answer. "Good," Judge Tate said. "Now." She opened the main file. The Guardian ad litem report has been in evidence and both parties have had the opportunity to respond. Ms. Odom, do you have any modifications to your original recommendation? Patricia Odom looked up. "No, Your Honor, my recommendation stands." "Then I'll proceed to finalize." Judge Tate picked up her pen. "Primary residential custody of the minor child Elias Robert Carter is awarded to the father, Daniel Robert Carter, to be effective immediately upon entry of this order." She continued reading the terms, the visitation schedule, the holiday arrangements, the provisions for communication and travel. Standard language that in any other case would have felt bureaucratic, but in this room on this morning felt like the final notes of something that had been building for a very long time. Then she stopped. "Set the pen down." She looked at Daniel directly. "Mr. Carter," she said, "this court has presided over a great many custody and divorce proceedings. It is rare, genuinely rare, that this court encounters a situation in which a party voluntarily disclosed a financial position of this magnitude under seal, without compulsion, specifically to protect the integrity of the proceedings and the welfare of a minor child." She paused. "It is also rare to see a man of your means choose the life you have chosen and maintain it not as strategy, but as genuine conviction." Another pause. "Your son is fortunate." The room was very still. "Thank you, Your Honor," Daniel said. Then Judge Tate did something that nobody in the room had seen her do before. She looked at Victoria. "Ms. Harlow," she said, not unkindly, not with the weight of judgment, just directly. "The visitation schedule this court is entering is designed to give your son consistent, meaningful time with you. What you do with that time is entirely in your hands." She paused once more. "This court hopes you use it well." Victoria sat very straight. Her jaw was set. But her eyes and Patricia Odom noticed this and wrote it down afterward in her personal notes, that no one would ever read her eyes were bright in the way that eyes get when someone is holding something back that has real weight. "I will, Your Honor," she said. "I intend to." Judge Tate nodded. She signed the order. She handed it to her clerk. She stood, and the room stood, and then she was gone. And just like that, it was over. The hallway outside was quieter than it had been at any previous hearing. No reporters. No satellite vans. The story had moved on to something else the way stories do. Philip Breck shook Harriet's hand with the professional courtesy of a man who has lost a well-played game and knows it. He said something brief to Daniel, something like, "Congratulations" or "Good luck," or one of those corridor phrases that mean several things at once, and then he and Victoria walked toward the elevator together. Daniel was putting his jacket on when he heard footsteps come back. "Victoria." She came to stand in front of him this time, not beside him at a window. In front of him, direct which took something. He could see that it took something. "I have Eli this weekend," she said, "starting Friday afternoon." "I know," he said. "I want to take him somewhere he likes. Not somewhere impressive, somewhere he actually likes." She paused. "Where does he want to go, if you had to guess?" Daniel thought about it. "The Science Museum downtown has a new space exhibit," he said. "He's been asking about it for 3 weeks. He wants to see the part about Jupiter." "Jupiter," she said. "He's very serious about Jupiter right now," Daniel said. "I don't fully understand it, but I respect it." Something moved across her face. Recognition warmth. The specific tenderness of a parent hearing about their child's obsession and feeling it land exactly where it's supposed to land. "I'll take him to see Jupiter," she said. "He'll talk about it for a month," Daniel said. "Good," she said, and she meant it. She turned to go, then stopped. Turned back one more time. "Daniel," she said, "I've been trying to figure out how to say this, and I don't think there's a clean way, so I'm just going to say it." She met his eyes directly. "You were a better husband than I deserved, and you are a better man than I understood. And I'm sorry it took me losing both to figure that out." He looked at her for a moment. The honest thing, the easy thing, would have been to deflect it to say something generous and move on. But she had said it plainly, and it deserved a plain answer. "I know," he said, "and I forgive you. Not for you, for Eli." She nodded once. It was a short nod, the kind that means understood and accepted, and thank you without the word. Then she walked to the elevator and didn't look back. Harriet appeared beside him. "Ready?" she said. "Yeah," he said. They walked out together into the October morning. 3 weeks later, on a Saturday, Daniel Carter drove to a modest office building on the east side of Knoxville and walked into a second-floor suite that bore a small brass plate on the door reading Carter Family Foundation, established 2024. Inside, Harriet was already at the conference table with 2 members of the board. They'd assembled a retired educator named James Whitfield and a woman named Dr. Renata Cruz, who ran a workforce development nonprofit in eastern Tennessee. Sandra Voss was there too, seated across the table with a legal pad and a cup of coffee, and the particular quiet alertness of someone who is still getting used to being in the room. Her daughter Eleanor, 16, and watchful in the way that her mother was watchful, sat beside her. Daniel came in and shook hands around the table and sat at the head of it and looked at the faces of the people his father's money was going to serve, and he felt something that had no clean name but was close to peace. "Let's talk about what we're building," he said. What they were building was not complicated by design. The Carter Family Foundation would fund 3 things. First, vocational and trade education scholarships specifically for students in rural Tennessee and Kentucky who wanted to learn a skilled trade and couldn't afford the training. Because Daniel Carter believed with the conviction of a man who had lived it that there was dignity and permanence in working with your hands, and that the people who did it deserved a foundation under them. Second, small business development grants for first-generation entrepreneurs in underserved communities. The kind of grants that didn't require a credit history or a connected uncle. Just a real idea and a willingness to work. And third, a rotating fellowship for child welfare research named quietly and without fanfare. For Robert Carter, focused on family stability and what actually keeps children safe and whole. Eleanor Voss listened to all of it without speaking. Toward the end of the meeting, she raised her hand, a small, careful gesture, like someone who wasn't sure she had the right to take up space in this room. "Yes," Daniel said. "The vocational scholarships," she said. "What trades?" "Any accredited skilled trade," he said. "Automotive aviation mechanics, electrical, HVAC welding construction, whatever the student chooses." She looked at the table for a moment. Then, "I want to be an aviation mechanic." The room was quiet. Sandra looked at her daughter. Something crossed her face that was too large for one expression. Daniel looked at Eleanor for a moment. Then he looked at Sandra. Then back at Eleanor. "The first scholarship," he said, "has your name on it when you're ready." Eleanor looked up and the careful watchfulness broke for just a moment, just a crack, just enough light to get through, and what was underneath it was pure, unguarded 17-year-old hope. She looked like her grandfather, around the eyes, in the particular stillness of someone who feels something deeply and doesn't know yet how to let it all the way out. "Thank you," she said. "Don't thank me," Daniel said. "Study hard, show up, do the work." He almost smiled. The rest takes care of itself. After the meeting, when everyone else had gone, Daniel sat alone in the foundation office for a few minutes. The brass plate on the door was visible from where he sat. Carter Family Foundation, the name his father had built and his grandfather had started, and he had carried without ever setting it down, even when he could have, even when no one would have blamed him for it. He thought about his father, about a man who had written letters he never shared, and amended a trust with a door left open, and died before he could explain any of it. About the kind of love that doesn't announce itself, that just quietly arranges things so the people it loves will be all right, long after it's gone. He thought about Eli running across school pavement with his arms wide open. He thought about a drawing on a refrigerator, a lumpy gray elephant, made so Captain wouldn't be lonely. He pulled out his phone. It was 2 in the afternoon. Eli was with Victoria today, the Science Museum Jupiter, the thing he'd been asking about for 3 weeks. A text came in, from Victoria's number. It was a photo. Eli standing in front of a massive illuminated model of Jupiter, pointing at it with the full-arm enthusiasm of a child who has just seen something that confirms everything he already suspected about the universe. His mouth was open. His eyes were wide. He looked like someone who had just been handed proof that the world is larger and more extraordinary than anyone told him. Below the photo Victoria had typed, he said, and I quote, "Jupiter is the biggest one, and nobody ever gives it enough credit. He's been saying this for 20 minutes to anyone who will listen." Daniel laughed. "A real one, the kind that starts in the chest and arrives at the face before you can stop it." He typed back, "Sounds right." Her response, "He's magnificent. Thank you for this weekend, you." He looked at the message for a moment. Then he put the phone in his pocket and looked at the brass plate on the door one more time. He thought about what people saw when they looked at him, or rather what they used to see. The worn boots, the flannel shirt, the cracked mirror truck, the man at the back of the courthouse hallway who appeared to be losing something, the mechanic who everyone assumed had nothing because he didn't perform having something. He thought about what they missed, what they almost always miss when they look at a quiet man and read the quiet as emptiness. The truth was simple. It had always been simple. And it was this: character is not what you display when the stakes are high and the room is watching. Character is what you are at 6 in the morning when the coffee is on and the house is still and no one is grading you. Character is what you choose when the choice costs you something. Character is what you leave behind in the people who watched you, really watched you, and learned from the watching. Daniel Carter had been given a fortune. He had also been given something rarer, something his father had understood was more important than anything the money could buy: the clarity to know who he was without it. He stood up, put his jacket on, turned off the light in the foundation office, walked out. He drove to the Science Museum and found his son standing in front of Jupiter, still going still, telling a small group of politely interested strangers that nobody gave it enough credit. Victoria was standing to the side, with her hands in her coat pockets, watching Eli the way a person watches something they are deeply grateful to be witnessing. She saw Daniel come in, and her expression didn't shift into anything complicated. It just settled. The way two people settle into a room they've learned to share. Daniel walked over and stood beside her, and they both looked at their son. "How long has he been doing this?" Daniel said quietly. 40 minutes, Victoria said. "He converted 2 retired school teachers and a man who I believe was just trying to find the bathroom." "That's my boy," Daniel said. Eli turned and saw his father, and his face lit up with that total unself-conscious joy that children carry before the world teaches them to moderate it. Dad, I was telling them." "I heard," Daniel said. "I heard from outside." "It's the biggest," Eli said with the gravity of a scientist confirming a fundamental truth. and it has more moons than anyone talks about. 79, Daniel said. At last count. Eli pointed at him. Exactly, he said. 79 and nobody mentions them. Victoria made a sound that was half laugh and half something softer. Eli turned back to Jupiter, already moving on to the next thing he needed everyone to understand. And Daniel Carter stood in a science museum in Knoxville, Tennessee, next to the woman who had once laughed at him in a courthouse hallway watching his son champion the overlooked moons of the largest planet in the solar system. And he understood the way he had always understood things quietly, without ceremony, without needing anyone to confirm it that this was what the fortune was for. Not the foundation, not the scholarships, not the brass plate on the door. This. Right here. A 5-year-old who knew he was loved enough to be exactly himself without apology, without performance, without holding anything back. That was the inheritance that mattered. Everything else was just proof it was real.